Uganda. So we are now Uwezo Uganda, but not Uwezo Tanzania. Uwezo Uganda continues to be part of the People's Action for Learning Network, or PAL in short, which has member organizations in 14 countries across 3 continents, and all of them with a focus on assessing children's foundational skills and undertaking citizen-led actions aimed at improving learning outcomes. Across 3 continents. The year 2020, therefore, was the foundation year of Uwezo Uganda, and as the young independent entity struggled to fully establish herself, there came COVID-19 pandemic. With the concomitant lockdowns in this country and globally. We thought that the lockdowns were to be short-lived, but we were wrong, because after the first lockdown, we entered a second lockdown. The assessment of 2021 was therefore conducted in the difficult conditions of schools closure and restricted movement, in the belief that its findings could contribute to the tasks of recovery of the education system from the effects of COVID-19 pandemic that lie ahead. Some of the challenges experienced are long-term, as reported in earlier assessment reports, and others new due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We shall have a panel discussion, as mentioned, after the presentation of the findings to broaden our outlook on the findings. Ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude my welcome remarks, Uwezo Uganda fondly appreciates Mr. Rakesh Rajani, the founder of Twaweza and Uwezo, and Twaweza board, Mr. Aiden Eyakuze, the current executive director of Twaweza, and the entire Twaweza management for the support we have received over the years, and most especially when we transitioned into a separate independent entity. We are indeed deeply indebted to the 870 Uwezo volunteers and the 29 village coordinators who visited a total of 5,673 households and surveyed 15,033 children in a total of 435 villages. We thank the head teachers of 387 primary schools and the local council leaders of the 435 villages that were visited for allowing entry into their spaces at a difficult time. Our thanks indeed go to the heads of the households that were visited for welcoming us into their homes and allowing us to interact with their children. We indeed heartily appreciate your interest and commitment to ensure that the children continue to learn in one way or the other at a time when school system had shut down. Once again, I thank you for your time and assure you that Uwezo Uganda will continue to search for the appropriate answer to the slogan, our children learning. I thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Lutalo Bosa. Very accomplished, having served in different capacities. Former Dean, Faculty of Sciences, Makerere University. Former Deputy Vice Chancellor, Makerere University. Former Principal of the Institute of Teacher Education, Kyambogo. Founder Vice Chancellor of Kyambogo University. Chairman of Planning Committees of Sitema and Gulu University. Former Chairman, Ugandan National Examinations Board. Chairman, Board of Trustees, Ugandan National Teachers Union. Chair of the Advisory Committee of National Assessment of Progress in Education. Chair of the Uwezo Uganda Board of Directors. Vice Chancellor, Team University, an educationist. The list continues. Cows would return home if I were to introduce him in detail. Sorry, it was an oversight. I had not noticed the presence. You know, these masks. There's a time I passed my wife. I couldn't recognize her. But I had not recognized the presence of Dr. Tone Mukasa Lusambu, former Assistant Commissioner, Basic Education in the Ministry of Education and Sports. Thank you for coming. It's a very high-powered delegation here. Now, but I had not recognized the presence of the real moment comes out now. Former Assistant, the lady who was at the helm, you can say she was in the kitchen. Went around the country, surveyed, sampled, engaged in science, mathematics, and everything. And today, she presents to us the key findings. Dr. Mary Goretti Nakabugo, the Executive Director, Uwezo Uganda, will be coming to speak to us and present some of the key findings as part of the report. The report is such a document, but it can be summarized with some of the key findings. Dr. Mary, will you come to the podium?
Okay. I'm going to use this machine to present, so I prefer to stand here. Can everyone hear me? Even the colleagues online, can you hear me? Can you see me? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. The Honorable Minister of State for Education, Primary Education, or High Representative, and representatives of the Ministry of Education, the Honorable Member of Parliament, who is also the chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Quality Education, and the Workers MP, Honorable Rabushaija, other parliamentarians joining here physically, but also online, our partners from all over the world, but also from the grassroots, from the districts where we did the assessment and where we didn't do the assessment. Ladies and gentlemen, it is really, really a great honor for us to be unveiling this report here today. Very many thanks to the chairperson of the board of Uwezo Uganda and other members of the board of Uwezo Uganda for the opening remarks and really giving this report a context. So I think relevance. So that's why this time we said we have to go beyond the usual really assessments. Can we try now to illuminate what impact or effect this whole pandemic has done on the education system. But before we go into that, what is the? So that's why this time we said we have to go beyond the usual really assessments. Can we try now to illuminate what impact or effect this whole pandemic has? So before we go into that, I think we're asking this question about our children learning. But the concept of learning can be quite elusive. That car that you see on the screen, I mean, using a metaphor of a car, can explain actually the nature of learning. That car is a 1919 model. It is, the owner has been driving it since 2006. And I don't know how many people here drive manual cars. How many of you drive manual cars or learned driving a manual car? Okay, thank you very much. And if you didn't learn driving with a manual car, then think about how you learned about to manipulate a computer. In the place of a car, put a computer. So if you learned driving a manual car and you actually learned thoroughly well, you drive it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but maybe after 3 years, 3 to 5 years, actually, something happens and you no longer have a car. You run out of money. So you spend 1 year not driving. Second year, not driving. How many of you think 1 year, 2 years of not driving your manual car? How many of you think that when you get a manual car again, you will have lost all the skills of driving, that you'll have to go back to driving school to learn again? How many of you think, yes, I would have lost it? How many? Even people, how many of you think that when you get a manual car again, you will have lost all the skills of driving? How many are saying, maybe let me just ask an open question. Will you? How many are saying, yes, I would lose the skill? Here in the physical years, nobody says they'll lose the skill. How many are saying, no, I won't lose the skill because I already learned it? How many? Please put up your hands. Good. Some. And online, Farida, what are people? I would lose the skill. People saying, nobody says they'll lose the skill. How many are saying no? They can't lose the skill. They can't lose the skill. Turn to this metaphor when we present the findings, because I think ever since the pandemic came and countries closed their education systems, and Uganda, I think, has been the country that closed the education system longest. That's what they say. And the worry has been that, okay, even the little that children learned, they lost it. Then we go back to the question, what is learning? Had they actually learned in the first place? So we shall come back to that. So that's what they say. And the worry has been that, okay, even the little that children learned. This report that we're launching today, so we shall come back to that. August to September. And this is the latest of a series of our national learning assessments that we have conducted since 2010. Professor Lutalo gave the history of Uwezo Uganda. We started conducting still part of Uwezo East Africa, but this is assessment that we conduct as an independent entity. And this assessment, as you may all know, was conducted in a very difficult situation. At that time, actually, Uganda was on a lockdown, but they had relaxed a bit that people could actually go to households. So there was a bit of restriction on movement and schools were still closed. But we said, okay, let us put in place all possible measures to safeguard everyone, because we thought that the findings could really help to contribute to the discussion, but also to identify strategies that could be used to recover the education system. And I think this is a task that is a very big one that is lying ahead of all of us. So we did the national learning assessment in 29 districts, which are nationally representative. And we really appreciate the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, which helped us to sample these districts to ensure that they are nationally representative. We also worked in partnership with 29 partner civil society organizations, which helped us to coordinate the assessment. We had 870 citizen volunteers, and those 870 citizen volunteers were scattered in each of the villages. That in the villages were 435 villages, and in each village we had 2 volunteers. So they were scattered there and reaching the households to assess the children. We covered over 5,000 households, and in the process, we surveyed over 15,000 children between the age of 4 to 16 years. But much as the schools were still closed, we were also able to access the schools through the head teachers. We made arrangements for the head teachers to come back, because the schools had opened temporarily since something had happened, and we wanted to actually understand what had happened from their point of view. So we reached them. But in all this, as I said, we ensured that everybody, that's a lineup of masks that we are going out to the communities. So everyone who was involved got a mask, for example, as an example of safeguarding against the virus. So now I'll take you quickly through the key findings. And the findings are to the communities. So everyone who was involved got a mask, for example, as an example of to be presented against the virus. So presented under for participation education, much as the preschool is not formally part of the formal education system, because it's in the, I think, the private hands, much as government regulates. But the fact that we assess children 4 to 5, that is also covered. The second section is about learning outcomes, and I think that is where everybody wants to hear. Then we have some findings on the continued learning during school closure, and then resources in primary education. So whatever I'm presenting is summarized in the summary of key findings. We have a summary sheet here, and I'll request Farida or Vincent to share the link to the summary sheet with our online participants. The summary sheet has infographics, but the presentation is going to delve deep into where the infographics come from in some ways, so that we appreciate the findings. This is also a curtain raiser for you that after this launch, please engage with our report and the summary. So kindly share that online, the summary of findings, but also the link to the report. First wait until the minister has already launched it. So in terms of participation, the first finding that we have, which is quite expected, is that the pandemic had a problem of overage children. And for those of you who are educationists, you know the dangers of overage children. Their concentration sometimes they need to be enticed. I mean, sometimes if they find education not interesting at all, I think overage also increases the issues of absenteeism, dropouts, and so on and so on. So it was already there, but the extended closure of schools has actually exacerbated this problem. And an example here that we have, so actually if you see, what is my, so dropouts and so on and so on. So it was already there. So if you can see, for those of you who are seeing on the screen, we have this table which has 3 colors in it. We have yellow, but we also have green, and we have yellow, green, and white. Okay. So the children, for those of you who are seeing on the screen, we have this table which has 3 colors in it. We have yellow, but we also have green, and we have yellow, green, and white. Okay. Have actually are behind. I'll just give you an example. I mean, this is overloaded, but just to help you digest it. If you look at age 8, where have actually are behind. I'll just give you an example. I mean, this is overloaded, but just to help you digest it. If you look at age 8, where they said that, oh, my class had not yet opened, my school had not yet opened. I think some of them tended to mix that current lockdown with the previous lockdown. They gave us, number one, 47%, actually like 48% were afraid of contracting the virus. That 47%. That current lockdown with the previous lockdown, they gave us, number one, feared contracting the virus, but following on that, were 14% who said they didn't go because their schools were charging too much. So I think for all these 2 issues, they can be addressed because put safeguards, but also being understanding that everybody has been affected by this virus, not to overcharge. The other one on participation was the issue of disability. We also tracked that using what they call the Washington tool. And we tried to identify using the Washington tool, the population of children aged 4 to 16 who had visual difficulty, hearing difficulty, walking difficulty, and memory difficulty. But one thing that also we ranked the children who had dropped out, what was the percentage of those children who actually had disabilities? We realized that actually those with vision, walking, and memory difficulties were more represented. But one thing that also we ranked the children who had dropped out, among the dropouts, that you have, if you look at, for example, those with vision difficulty, in the total population of children of 15,000 that we assessed, 3.8 reported having hearing or vision rather difficulties. Among the dropout, there are 5.8, meaning that it's possible that they dropped out because they had a disability. So we need to find a way of identifying these children and actually supporting them. I'll now take you quickly to the learning outcomes. What are the key findings on the learning outcomes? Very quickly. Outcome number one, finding number one, is that the proportion of children fully competent in English reading for the whole set of grades, P3 to P7, has risen from 32.5% in 2018 to 39.5% in 2021. But the proportion of non-readers has also increased from 6.2 in 2018 to 11.6 in 2021. So it has almost doubled. So I think this takes us back to the metaphor that I used on the car. Once one has learned, if they learned well and they have automated that learning, they may not lose it actually, even when there's a shock of a pandemic. But those who have not yet learned, it's very easy to lose it. That is why you will see that the number of non-readers is increasing. For the young children, actually, the learning decreased because they hadn't yet automated these learnings, the skills. In numeracy, also the overall rate of full competence for P3 to P7 increased from 45 to 0.4% in 2018 to 48.8 in 2021. Numeracy competence. So you can see for the young children, it's actually decreasing. And what for P3 to P7 increased from 45 to 0.4% in 2018. What are we calling the full competence? For reading, and I said they be out of P2 level. The other highlight of findings under the learning competence is that the percentage of P3 children who could read and comprehend a P2 English story, and also divide at primary 2 level, it also increased from 26% to 32%. I think that is, you relate it back to, to the automation of learning, but also there were ways that different stakeholders supported children to continue learning, even when schools closed. But when it comes to primary 3, for example, that percentage remained the same at 7%, which is extremely low. So it's less than 10% or less than 1% out of 10 in P3 who is able to read a primary two-story and understand it, and at the same time we divide. So the learning outcomes are extremely low. In reading in local languages was actually the most affected, especially for the young children. The percentage of non-readers in primary 3 increased from 40.5% in 2028 to 54.5% in 2021. Much as there were improvements in that area, especially for the older children, like in P7, the percentage of those who are able to read and understand the local language story increased from 40.5 to 68, but the most affected of the young age. And that is really our main kind of really finding there, that English competence in English reading and numeracy by age is that in general, the 2021 children has been delayed more by the pandemic and school closures than the older children. And if there's anything that you can take away from this launch, that should be the tagline. The learning of young children has been delayed more by the pandemic and school closures than that of older children. And that is the foundation. So the example here is, let's use our example of the 8-year-old children. When we did an assessment, a SMID assessment, 2018, children who were non-readers at that time, at the age of 8, were 32%. This thing has covered, yeah, 32%. And give me a second. In 2018, non-readers, and a definition of a non-reader for us is a child who cannot even recognize letters of the alphabet. That is a non-reader. They can't recognize letters of the alphabet. So by 2021, children aged 8, over 50%, to be precise, like 51%, are non-readers. They can't recognize letters of the alphabet to name them or sound them out. I think then I'll take you to what could be the factors really working against. What are the variations of these learning outcomes? One of the key findings that we have here are the regional variations in learning outcomes. And these have been consistent over the years, but now they have been aggravated by the pandemic. There are consistent differences between the regions, with the central region far in the lead. The central region far in the lead, with the west in the middle, but the north and the east really are underperforming. So if my okay, so if we take an example of reading, so we used reading word in English and able to subtract. That is a lower level skill in a way, because it's kind of representative of the age group that we have. But even using reading words in English, you can see where the central is. So you have, take an example of reading, is that orange? Reading word in English and able to subtract the color. The color, those are girls, and blue are the boys. So if you compare in the central region, but even using reading words in English, compare that with the north. So only 30% of girls in the north could read. It's actually like 50% difference. You can see the variation. So that is a problem that we it's a challenge that we need to tackle. Has also been a challenge of a worry that the kids with disability actually may be left out even further because of the pandemic. Actually, our findings indicated that overall, the children with disabilities were actually competitive. They're doing as well as those with disability, apart from in a few areas. And that area was mainly the memory. Children who had memory or mental problems were a little bit below in terms of skills or competences compared to their counterparts who didn't have those mental or memory problems. But again, it is a difference. So 40% with memory difficulty could read words compared to 43% who could read, those who didn't have. So it's just a 3 percentage point. But that does not say that we don't need to give attention to learners with disability. Whenever there is a crisis, we tend to kind of neglect the children, and yet we shouldn't leave anyone behind. So again, also our usual finding that children who have attended preschool by at least 2 years, the findings still indicate that they had higher competences compared to their counterparts who didn't have access to at least 2 years of preschool, irrespective of their socioeconomic class. Somehow the preschool component made a difference, and so on. So I'll now take you quickly through the findings on continued learning during school closure. You have seen the that in some ways, actually the learning didn't decline. Especially for the older children. In some ways, it improved a psychological concept that we used of automation. So perhaps these children had already automated the reading and numeracy, that even if you had closed the schools, maybe for some of them may not have lost, but the damage was being done especially at the foundation, which we should ensure that it is strong. So another element which might have helped for those who didn't lose the learning was this continued learning during closure. So we asked whether the children had continued learning during the school closure or not. And this is grade-based. So the findings indicate that the higher the grade, the more likely the child was involved in if you look at P7, my screen is covered because of the presentation, but where you have 74%, that 71 rather percent, those are P7 kids, I suppose. Yeah, that is P7. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, P7. Compare with the lower classes. So they tended to be more learning here or studying during closure because of examinations, I'm sure. In senior 4, 88%. Compare that with the lower classes. Those are preschool, 28, P1. So the lower. And this is actually funny because us on the lower grades, starting from preschool, the focus here was mainly on the upper classes. It's the lower grades actually which never went back to school. Ever since we closed in March 2020 until yesterday when they went, they were at home. We forget that they're the foundation, and even the learning interventions at home, they happened for the older children. So again, that is maybe another takeaway from here. And I'll just skip that. Another learning that took place during the closure was, yes, they were not in school, but the question, did they learn any other skills? We are happy to report that actually the majority of the children reported to have learned something during closure. Just use my screen. And they participated very actively in the informal economy. The two areas where the children reported to have learned more was on issues of gardening and cooking. Does this mean that when schools open, children actually don't engage in these things? Maybe this is also an eye-opener, that learning other skills does not only happen when schools are closed. Perhaps it should be a continuous process. But we do have that the top areas in which they learned was gardening and then cooking, but they also learned other skills like charcoal making and so on. One thing that is quite different, no, it's not different. I think it's the other finding. I'll just skip that. It's okay. So you can see that there's other learning that happened besides the academic subjects. Then lastly, in terms of the presentation, is the resources in primary education. Much as the schools were closed, we said that we interacted with head teachers of the schools to try and understand the nature of resources that they have, but also to understand what happened when schools temporarily reopened. And one of the findings that we have here is that between 2018 and 2020, the pupil-teacher ratios seem to have become larger. So an example here is that in government-aided schools, by the time we did our last assessment before this one in 2018, the pupil-teacher ratio was 52 children per teacher, 50 to 1 teacher, 52 to 1 teacher. By 2020, that had increased to 65 to 1 teacher. Maybe you may now imagine what has happened with the classes that have been seated home and new ones coming. Maybe this is another area that needs to be addressed as we think about the education system. Again, there are variations in terms of resources. We saw the variations in learning outcomes favoring the central and then the west, and really the northern and the eastern areas underperforming. The same applies to the resources or the infrastructure here. For example, when we talk about the pupil classroom ratios, this is the number of children who are accommodated in a class, right? So for the region, like central region, this has not changed too much from 2015, where the pupil classroom ratio was 68 to 1, and now in 2020 it was 67. But look at the northern region. It was already bad before the pandemic, way before the pandemic, like 5 years before the pandemic. The pupil classroom ratio stood at 105. But now we're talking about 146 children squashed in a classroom. Think about the comfort, but also think about the risks involved in that, with the pandemic still ravaging the country. Anyway, in conclusion, what are the key takeaways from this, and what should be done? We are recommending making 5 recommendations without really going deep into them. Number 1 is that let's focus on acquisition of the foundational skills of literacy and numeracy in the lower primary grades. And when we talk about acquisitional learning, it should be permanent learning. It's like learning the other manioka that I told you about, that even if you spend 5 years without driving it, because you learned it, you don't lose that skill. If we don't invest in the foundations, what they are learning is not deep learning, it is surface learning. When you close, they actually lose it. So can we invest in the foundations to ensure that children acquire the skills of literacy and numeracy in the lower grades? What our findings actually have indicated is that children start acquiring these foundations when they're in primary 5. Below that, they have not acquired them. And how do we achieve this? Let us support interventions that supplement the efforts of teachers and schools. This is not the time to protect our territories. Everybody's effort is needed. Community interventions that work with volunteers to support learning, let us support them. There are some interventions already happening, like interventions under the teaching at the right level. I think organizations like VVOB, Building Tomorrow, FCDO is implementing the community-led learning interventions, Regional Education Learning Initiative. They're actually implementing some of these interventions. This is not the time to relax. Such interventions have to increase if we are to build the foundations of the children in literacy and numeracy. Increase the provision of teachers in government-aided primary schools. I think you saw the finding on the pupil-teacher ratios. That is caused by the number of government teachers that we have, especially in the northern and eastern region. Remedy the shortage of classrooms. For us, over the years, we have said focus on learning outcomes. But I think also infrastructure has to go hand in hand. You've seen the pathetic conditions of schools. I mean, especially now that we have the pandemic, classrooms are equally important. So especially in the eastern and northern region, let's attend to that. And lastly, we saw in the findings that children who have at least 2 years of preschool, their foundation is stronger than others. Let us support the smooth reopening of the ECD. Much as it's now official that they are open, but many of them might be struggling, especially the community-based ones. Let's try to support them because they are really a big foundation to the literacy and numeracy skills that we are trying to achieve. I really thank you very much. I think I took a bit longer, but I really want to thank you very much, all of you. Many of the people who supported this assessment, we are acknowledged at the beginning by our chair of the board, Professor Lutalo, and many others really supported. But in a special way, I would like to acknowledge the support of our development partners who have supported this work and a lot of other work that Uwezo Uganda does. I think online we have our supporters and partners from Wellspring Philanthropic Fund. Joyce, if you're online, hello. Then we have Ekitina Giving. We have FCDO, that is the UK government, and Cecil, Strengthening Education Systems for Improved Learning. That's the program of the UK government. We have benefited from that over the years. And of course, our mother or father, Twaweza East Africa. Aiden, if you're online, and management of Twaweza, we thank you very, very much. Of course, the list is really, really endless. Our founder of Twaweza and Uwezo, Rakesh Rajan, Professor mentioned him. I mean, we wouldn't have been doing this. Hope you find it amazing work if we didn't have the foundation and many, many others that will be acknowledged as we go on. So thank you very, very much. And I hope this triggers some conversation as we proceed with it.
Oh yeah, definitely. You deserve a round of applause and thank you very much. Well, these are brutal realities and I hope we agree to this. And these are things that we must confront with honesty, without burying our heads in the sand. While Dr. Mary Goretti was going through her findings, I spotted another very important guest Dr. Grace Baguma, the Director, National Curriculum Development Center. What a pleasure having in our midst. Dr. Baguma, I might brief you that we have a very big virtual audience who are keenly following whatever is happening, and they will be willing to send in their comments, their views and comments on the critical subject of the day. Let me now invite our panelists who will be sharing with us their thoughts on the key findings and maybe prescribing some of the solutions. Sometimes people think there is too much lamentation without prescribing solutions. Luckily, this report diagnoses and treats, prescribes the basic treatment. So may I invite Mr. Robert Ikwap, the Assistant Commissioner in the Ministry of Health in charge of primary education. And this report was very specific, handling primary education. I will, in the same vein, invite Dr. Grace Baguma to come up here. Honorable Margaret from Shasia, please come and join the panel as well. But before we delve into their comments and views, before we hear from them, let me invite a team that is going to give us a breather, while at the same time illustrating the reality of where the current education stands in the country. I'll invite Furaha Africa, the group that organized a very short skit for us that demonstrates where the country stands in matters education.
In education news, as per Uwezo National Learning Assessment Report 2021, key findings of why some young learners consider not going back to school after the first lockdown. Watch the details. On the other hand, non-academic and practical skills learned or improved at home during school closure were on the rise during this time. Watch the details. In light of the findings of the Uwezo report, some of these issues have a long history, but were magnified by the COVID-19 health emergency. What must we do? 1, focus on acquisition of the foundational skills of literacy and numeracy in the lower primary grades. 2, support interventions that supplement the efforts of teachers and schools. 3, Support the reopening of nursery schools and early childhood development centers. 4. Increase the provision of teachers in government-aided primary schools. And 5. Remedy the shortage of classrooms in the eastern and northern regions.
Wow. Isn't it amazing that the report is summarized in just 3 minutes? And the climax speaks to positivity, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. But while we go about all this, it's very important to capture the views of some of the most remarkable personalities in the education sector. I will be running through some of the bios of the panelists here before us. Please feel free to have a bottle of water each. And can I ask my technician to come and turn on the mics? On my immediate right is Mr. Robert Equap. He is the Assistant Commissioner, Basic Education, Ministry of Education and Sports. And that's where the crux of this survey really lies. Next is Dr. Grace Baguma. She is the chairperson, rather the director of the National Curriculum Development Center. She's occupied this big office since July 2015, having served as a curriculum specialist at the same organization. And she's so deep in curriculum development, plus, of course, the design of curriculum materials, writing, publishing, and everything curriculum. On the extreme, Honorable Margaret Rabushaija, a workers' member of parliament. She also doubles as the chairperson of the Parliamentary Forum for Quality. Mark that, quality education. A teacher by profession. She's really taught for decades before she veered into politics. But once a teacher, always one. She was very outspoken as a full member of UNATU, and she's a member, she served on a number of committees. In the interest of time, I will not dwell on them. Dear panelists, thank you very much for coming. I'll begin with Honorable, may I also invite Professor Lutalo Bosa. Professor Lutalo Bosa, you're going to come and critique, not criticize. We normally miss these two words. But critiquing, giving a very honest view of what you think about the findings and what they really spell for education. May I begin with Honorable Margaret. Share with us your views. What have you found really striking?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I recognize the presence of the board chair, Uwezo, executive director, and all education staff around, ladies and gentlemen. What I can share is that as we open, we are having challenges. As we open schools, there are some challenges that we need to take note of. For example, whereas some offices ministry in particular, it says the children should, those who are pregnant or mothers breastfeeding young mothers should go back to school. There are sentiments that they should not go as of now until maybe after six months after delivering, which is still a challenge. I think it needs to be sorted out by the stakeholders so that we can have a solution, because the teachers would want to be guided, the head teachers, on what to do as of now. I cannot commit myself to say this is what should be done. Then also, we have another challenge, is that as you had our learners, schools, students or pupils in their skit, they pointed out that we have an issue of child labor. There are children who are not going back to school right now. I was reading yesterday in a paper, Namayingo, in Busoga. The children are not ready to go back to school because they have been involved in mining, gold mining within the area and within the district. And they have been earning between 10,000 to 30,000. So, and also we have a lot of vendors in Kampala, youngsters, I would call them maybe youth, but some of them are children. When you go around, say, in the streets of Kampala, you find them with the banana, sweet bananas, avocado, apples. They seem not to be going back to school. So it's a challenge to all of us. And then maybe what I wanted to point out is that these pregnant mothers or young breastfeeding mothers, the number is big. It's almost 1 million for these children. So what happens when about 1 million is not in school? So we need to think about it and see, because I look at it also as a challenge. And then we should also know that as the children settle down, they need social support because of what they have gone through, particularly those young mothers we are talking about. But there are others also who think they are too old for the class. You have missed 2 years and they think they are, like I would say, I was sharing with one mother who was saying the boy says he has a beard now, he's not fit to be in a class. And it will not be an isolated case. It could be a case of many others who are thinking like him. And we need to find a way of counseling to make sure them go back to school. Then we have colleagues in the private sector. Some of those schools are not there right now as we talk, because either the investors have thought of other businesses and they moved on. Others, they had loans from money lenders, even banks, and these schools have gone. Now you prepare a child to go back to school and you find you are alone. Like I saw a picture of one child in a school seated inside a class, but it was one. Maybe others had known about it and they didn't come. So those are some of the challenges that we are having. And we need a lot of patience. We need a lot of counseling and support. Social support is important because some of these people going back to school also lost their dear ones. That's what I can say as of now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Honorable Margaret Rabshaija. May I invite Mr. Robert Ikwa? But before you come in, sorry, there was an oversight again. I was meant to sit here, but I turned myself into a panelist. This is what we call enjoying the seat. So I'll invite Miss Dolorence Naswa Were, representing the Society for Disabled Children. She'll come and occupy this seat here. And apologies. Okay. May I now turn the mic to Mr. Robert Ikwap. How timely is this report? And how significant are the findings given that the new term has just begun?
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator, colleagues in the House, good, and those on the line. I salute you all. Good afternoon. I think the report that we are consuming today largely speaks to the realities of education in our country, pointing out the issues of low literacy and numerous levels. This has been the story in the past, but it has been worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic, which largely made the learners to stay at home and to a large extent, not learning. As a country, we are coming from a time when we have been trying to lay the foundation, especially addressing the issues of early grade reading, which was helping us to address the issue of literacy. But when the pandemic comes and our children are kept at home, we really see that they are greatly affected. The report seems to imply that low attention was paid to the learners at the foundational levels, which I think may not be very true, because there was a plan to reopen even the primary 1 to P3 classes. But given that we again realized another variant which came and it was very, very serious, it could not happen. So we're overtaken by the effect of COVID, and that's why the P1, 2, 3 have stayed at home for that long. But I think that what the report findings in regard to the effect on them, I agree with them. I agree with the report. The report points out that the effect on the younger learners was higher compared to the older learners. I think still for the same reasons that I've given, but also the older learners had a chance to go back to school and continue learning, at least for a short time. But in addition, having been at school for some time, they have learned learning skills. They have learned how to learn. And therefore, that has also helped the older learners to perform the way they are performed according to the report. But also their reading ability had to a large extent improved. And so the issues that are pointed out regarding the infrastructure differences and the resources generally contributing to the level of performance, this is true as pointed out by the report. I think the report is timely, given that the schools have just reopened, and we have done some visits to the schools, and the finding is that the turn-up of learners is low. I'd actually expected the learners to have turned up to school overwhelmingly. But surprisingly, that is not the case. But also the other issue is that even the learners that have turned up to school are apparently just physically present, but when you engage with them, you discover that they are not yet fully at school. The mind is still elsewhere. I think this is also in agreement with what the report says. And so that therefore calls upon all of us as a different stakeholders to put our energies together to mobilize the parents to send the children to school, but also the children themselves to take the responsibility to go back to school.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ikwap, for those very interesting observations. But well, before I move the microphone again, does the report capture some of the concerns you have as the ministry, or some of the things that you've gathered as the ministry so far?
Yeah, when we look at the recommendations in this report, they're actually in line with our focus as a ministry, because focus on literacy and numeracy acquisition. This is actually what we're trying to focus on, rallying everyone, including our partners, to support us in that area. The increasing teacher provision. Recently, the ministry has provided funding to those local governments that have very low staffing levels, at least to increase their staffing levels to a ratio of 1 to 60. So this is in line with what the report is saying, but even the one teacher to 60 learners is still not okay. But coming from what the report is pointing out, 113 pupils per teacher, if we can at least be able to achieve the 60 to 1, I think that is a step in the right direction.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ikwap. Dr. Grace Baguma, the report is very categorical on the lowering levels of comprehension, reading, and writing. Isn't this worrying?
Thank you very much, our moderator. I think the report is bringing out the reality of what we as education should now be looking at, focusing on. And indeed, from my interaction with the presentation and the report, I think there is need to refocus on the literacy and numeracy, to make emphasis and to look at how we can intensify the interventions, and as many interventions as we can get, as the presenter was saying, to make sure that we catch up with aspects of literacy that the children have lost, and numeracy indeed. So we need to refocus and to say, what is it that will support this to enable acceleration or catch up for that matter? So the literacy and the children, yes, whether you are getting old or not, you need to get literate. You need to learn how to read and write. You need to catch up. You need to be able to do something. So we need to refocus as a government and look at how we can put emphasis on enabling this early learning and the early learning interventions, and triangulate them and bring out the learners that we want at that level. Yes, we had a challenge of the 2 years, but we need now to not to lament. How do we get to catch up with what these people lost, and we bring them to scale? So there is also need, when you compare with 2018, of course, the comparison is still not so big, meaning that we are not going to use excuses of COVID-19 here. We need to say that still as a system, as a sector, how are we helping the teaching to happen in the manner in which it should happen? How are we providing the instructional materials? And how are we focusing on that teacher to do it right? So teaching in the context of all the other challenges is a matter of focusing on the teachers once again. But we still have to remain focused to quality education. We cannot acquire quality education when literacy and numeracy levels at the lower, the early learning are being compromised or lost. So that is why I have emphasized the aspect of refocusing to remain within quality. The teachers I've mentioned about it have to refocus, looking at teaching learners who have been disturbed. Of course, there are so many other psychological issues which my colleagues have touched on, but also looking at the curriculum center in terms of what should be packaged to be learned. Can we leave it at the basic of literacy and numeracy? And we get these people well grounded in that, because when they have that, then they can learn other things that easily. So what is it that we might have overloaded in the early learning situation? So we need to look at that and see how we can make it happen. I also was looking at the presentation on the children with low memory, and when you compare them with those who are supposed to be with good, they were not very far from each other. So there must be something wrong there. That's one of the things that was paining me as that Dr. Goretti was present. I said, oh my God. So when we have disabled special needs children with a memory issue, and then you compare them with these ones whom we are calling normal, and they are in the same category, what are we talking about? There is a bigger issue that we need to put our hands and heads together as people who are providing education to the children of this country.
Well,
the memory issue is really a terrible one. So also the issue of the younger children are still yet to learn how to learn. Yes, that's indeed another challenge, and indeed they are vulnerable. And my thinking is that we should also give attention as we program what to be learned to those. And this is indeed a timely report to inform government on certain actions or interventions. And we think that it's a lesson we are learning to take us back and see how best we can prepare and come up with interventions that will improve the situation to come up with quality education.
So it is prompting you to go back to the drawing board, isn't it?
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, wonderful. Very well. Lawrence, there's a bit where the report covers issues to do with children with disabilities. What kind of picture is it painting, in your opinion?
Thank you. Thank you very much. This report is actually a very encouraging report to me. I've worked for children with disabilities for a long time, and together with other civil society organizations, it's not audible? Oh, sorry. Okay, we feel that children with disabilities or children that have barriers, just like this report says, those with vision, walking, memory difficulties, were actually a larger proportion compared to those in the general population that had not been able to enroll. It rose a lot of what we've been failing to articulate, I think, to the policymakers, that there is something that we are not doing right. Those children are there, most of them do not enroll, and it is because the system does not encourage them to even enroll at all. And when they are there, just like the previous speakers have mentioned, they are not addressed. The teachers for special needs education are very few. They are indeed very, very few. And we struggle as small non-government organizations to see if such children could even, such teachers could even get onto the payroll. So it's indeed a very, very good thing to have happened with this Uwezo Uganda report. Children with disabilities are not learning, I can say, or they are learning at a lesser level than the others, simply because not enough effort has been taken by the stakeholders. I'm not just saying government, but by all stakeholders. Perhaps parents have not done it because of negative attitudes. Perhaps the teachers have shunned to take on those skills. Perhaps the curriculum is actually discriminating. And just to stay a bit on that, the learning outcomes in our country speak to literacy and numeracy. This report says those children that have cognitive barriers, those ones that they've, according to the classifications in disability, those that have memory difficulty are those that have cognitive barriers. But our system expects them to be able to read, to write, to count at a given age. Because this report also talks about age-specific progress in the education system. So while we have not addressed that bit, I think we shall lament a lot. We shall say we shall go back to the drawing board, and we shall keep saying we shall go back to the drawing board. And yet it is simple steps that we may need to take. Even without saying, let's just change the entire education system. It could be things that actually the Ministry of Education has attempted to address in the past. There was talk of functional assessment, which in simple terms is establishing the learning need of every learner at the onset, just as they join their education, as they begin their education journey. Do you know what their learning need is? So you have a baseline, and then you would know that this learner will never actually master the alphabet. This learner is perhaps dyscalculia, has that disability. They will never even learn those numbers. So if we did that, and not just for the usual suspects, but all our learners, I think for me, it's the best recommendation that I could give moving forward, and on such organizations that endeavor to bring all this to light, that can we embrace such simple aspects? Before you assess whether they are achieving learning, have you established whether they can learn, what they can learn, what they can't learn, and what they can, and what their journey in education will be like? Now, this report also did a very good thing. I do not know for sure whether it was just asking children whether they participated in gardening, or they actually established a good matrix, yeah, that can tell us that actually this one has now accessed, or has learned over the 2, 6, 7 months, can now do this kind of agriculture, can do this, I don't know, brick making and all that. Because I think those are the difficulties. How do you actually assess the progress, yeah, and compare it to these others of those that have cognitive skills? So while it's a good thing to have brought this up and show us, the public, that actually they are also skills, they should be assessed, but I think also teach us how to assess them. So for now, I think I would just like to keep it at this. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dolores. When I watched the skit, I was intrigued when a kid said, I've already started making money. And that's the reality. When a kid tells the teacher, but I'll be reading some of the comments from our online audience. The virtual audience is really active, and we want to thank you so much for logging in and participating in this very big conversation. But before I read out some of the views and some of the critical questions that have been shot to the panelists and the presenter, Dr. Mary Goretti, perhaps I'll entertain a couple of questions, or in just 2 minutes each, from the audience here. And let me start with Mr. Kaboyo, if you can be as brief as you can.
Thank you, Mr. Anjala, and to congratulate Uwezo Uganda for this report. My quick take is that same things are recurring. And if symptoms persist, we need to seek not medical attention, but specialized attention. So for me, the specialized attention here is that there should be an immediate intervention to respond to these issues without waiting. But of course, the long-term effect of this is that those we have seen are going to affect the manpower and human capital trajectory when we are employing these people, because the indicators are very clear. And on that, I think we should put the political leaders on the spot, specifically in local governments. Councils and political leaders should show cause for innovation and prioritization of how they are going to address this, because all this level of education is at the local government. Is it that the central government should extend more support, or is it that the local governments are not using that money critically? And very finally, I think Uwezo Uganda should have an elaborate advocacy strategy going forward to see that all issues raised are tackled head on. I thank you so much. That's what I can say.
Thank you very much. Dr. Tony.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate Uwezo and also thank the presenter, Dr. Goretti. Mine is a quick one. The members here, me inclusive, are not very comfortable about the findings. The findings are very, very intriguing to the extent that we can go home and fail to have nice sleep. Can you also comfort us in a way of telling us the steps we can take after here that will ensure that the topmost powers, the authority, can really get access to these findings? At least we can have a better sleep that way, because we shall be thinking and rest assured that the top brush of this country in education will get access to these pathetic findings.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting observations. And I imagine Dr. Margaret, rather Honorable Margaret, you have a lot on your platter because you're representing the political wing. So is Mr. Ikwap. And certainly all of us, it's incumbent that we take up the task. Well, there are a number of views and comments that have already been voiced regarding this report. And we want to thank all our virtual audience out there for the questions and observations that have been fired so far. Well, I'll read out some of them. Abdumalik Mwanga says, this is a good report anchored on the philosophical orientation of learning skills, bracket, literacy and numeracy. Can we shift from assessing literacy and numeracy so that we can interrogate parents' readiness to support children transition from homeschooling environment. Can we investigate more on children readiness to learn and children school readiness? There's evidence that the effect of school closures on reading in the lower classes is a serious concern. Pushing for increased recruitment of teachers to reduce on the pupil-teacher ratio is crucial. Mr. Ikwap, I guess this goes to you, and in a minute you could respond before we proceed.
Thank you very much. Colleagues who have raised the concerns, and particularly the colleague Abdul Malik, pointing out the issue of the need to mobilize the parents to support the learners to attend school and providing the basics, but also the issue of addressing the children's readiness to learn. I think while the member points out the need to maybe not to focus a lot on assessing literacy and numeracy, the issues is raising not necessarily a substitute, but they support in that area, because if the parents can adequately support the learners, the children, to go to school, to attend school regularly, to provide the materials that the learners need at school, then this in a way will promote their learning and help them become literate, but also be able to address the numeracy challenges. Children's readiness to learn, the report points out that the learners who attended nursery or pre-primary education, even for 2 years, their performance was better compared to those that had not. And so I do agree with the member in this area that children need to be prepared. One of the preparatory levels is pre-primary, because here the learners begin with socialization with others, because when they socialize, then when they get to the primary level, then they will not be challenged, but also they get the pre-reading and skills which prepare them that when they actually exposed to reading, they'll be able to catch up with this effectively. But it also goes beyond that, because when children have the psychosocial challenges, these need to be addressed, because when they come to school and their mind is elsewhere, then these children cannot learn. And so addressing the children's readiness to learn is a critical issue. And I thank the member for pointing this out. The issue of resources, I thank Patrick for raising this, because clearly the report shows a correlation between the resources and performance, because where resources are fairly okay, the performance is better. And I don't really think that those areas where like the classroom, pupil-classroom ratio, the pupil-teacher ratio are poor. It is just the failure of the local government to allocate accordingly. I think it is what they have been provided with, which is quite inadequate. And I think one of the panelists here can be able to help us in that area. How do we balance so that the question of resources, if they are balanced, then we could actually see what could be the other factors that bring a difference in the different regions of the country. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. There are certainly a number of issues that the audience out there is asking from Dr. Mary Goretti, and I believe you can make the appropriate response.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, panelists and the audience. I think one thing that is coming out is that everybody resonates with the findings. So, and I think one major issue is that things are more or less the same. Yes, there have been some improvements here and there, and of course, a lot of losses, but things are more or less the same like 2 or 3 years ago. So something has to be done. Yes. And I think there are also indications here, and I think we may have missed highlighting that finding. One of the contributions to the few, or maybe few, but actually we should also celebrate those ones, the improvements that were made. One of them was the joint effort to ensure that there was some continuity of learning even when schools closed. One of the key findings that we have there, I may have missed, was that because we tried to find out, how do you compare the literacy and numeracy findings of children who said that they continued learning and those who said they didn't continue learning? Actually, the gap is big. Some of them is like 10% difference. So meaning that actually, if we all put together our efforts, not leaving it to the schools, these initiatives that started of learning at home and communities, continuing, perhaps we can actually start addressing this. The issue of those printed materials, one of the things that we asked children, if you say you continued learning, what was your main source of learning? And one of them, they say the top one was radio. They were almost at the same level, radio programs, and then the printed materials from the Ministry of Education, but also private tutoring, and then being taught by a parent, and mainly mothers. So I think those they may seem small, but if we continue with those initiatives, we may actually start addressing this issue of ensuring that children learn significantly, not just surface learning. One of the questions that was asked by Dr. Lusambu and Mr. Kabuyu was, how do we take this forward? What is our engagement strategy? How do we ensure this goes into the right to the right people? And so the national report for us is always like the curtain raiser. It's just the beginning. We are going to engage actors at different levels. One reason why we called a parliamentarian here is we really want also to engage with that space. And Honorable Ramshaya has always been a fan of the work that we do. So we want to engage with the Committee of Education at Parliament, but also the Ministry of Education. We would want to have meetings and engagements with them. That the conversation has already started. We are here with a department that is, I think, most touched by these findings, basic education, but also the issues of curriculum. Whatever we are talking about here has implications on the curriculum somehow. So the conversations has started, but we shall also have the findings launched at district level. We shall generate district specific reports such that we also have that bottom-up action. So yeah, I think this year is, the work has just started, but thank you very much. Yeah.
I'll immediately switch. Dear colleagues in the media, I realize you have deadlines to beat. And I'm going to request Mr. Ikwapo, representing the Minister, State Minister for Education, Honorable Kaduchu, to wrap it up, and then he's going to formally launch the report. May I ask the Secretariat to bring us the report, because I know media is running. While he comes, okay, I'll ask Furaha to be ready with a skit that should be coming on. Mr. Ikwapo, please take up the role of the minister. The shoes are big, but you fit in them pretty well.
I think probably before I assume the role of the minister, may I make a few comments. One, on the issue of the home-based learning. This should have been very effective, but the problem is that it was more of self-driven. And so where you had the parents reluctant to take it up, the children, the learners themselves reluctant to take it up, then it was, the benefit was low. But where the drive was high on the individual, the benefits were high. So probably I needed to say that. And I think, let me now try to adjust myself. This is a speech of the minister. I observe protocol. The workers, member of parliament and chairperson of the Uganda Parliamentary Forum on Equality Education. Other members of parliament, the ministry officials, chairperson and members of Uwezo Uganda board, the chairperson and members of the technical advisory committee on Uwezo Uganda, the executive secretaries and directors of education agencies, all distinguished individuals participating physically or online, Uwezo Secretariat staff, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all today, this Tuesday, 18th January, 2022, at the release of the 2021 Uwezo Uganda National Learning Assessment Report. I would like to express my thanks to Uwezo Uganda for the contribution they have made over the years in informing the Education Ministry, especially in regard with the learning outcomes in Uganda. At the Ministry of Education, we welcome participation and contribution of initiatives like Uwezo's to the education sector. These are crucial for a continuous reminder on the role we have to deliver quality education to the children of Uganda. As you are all aware, Uganda has made great strides in increasing access to education through provision of free primary education. Numerous challenges, however, have been faced while undertaking this. There was an upsurge in the number of children in schools, and to date, millions have been able to attend school. However, amidst these challenges and gaps, this has yielded positive results, including a significant growth in the number of schools, classrooms, and teachers over the years. The prevailing COVID-19 pandemic has further created a significant setback to the progress the government of Uganda had made, including reforms within the education sector. As a sector, we recognize the urgent need to deal with the impact caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and other challenges, including the need to make adjustments to minimize learning losses. We are hopeful that collectively, with organizations like Uwezo Uganda, we can overcome this hurdle. Whereas we recognize that over the years, there have been a significant number of children out of school, and some of those enrolled not completing the primary cycle in some districts, the situation has been changing over time. The government, together with our development partners and civil society organizations, have made tremendous effort in ensuring these changes. With these joint efforts sustained, we shall be sure to make great strides in realizing targets for our national development plan and further make progress to realizing SDG 4. As a ministry, we acknowledge that the constraints existing in the delivery of quality education that should yield improved learning outcomes cannot be handled by the ministry alone. When organizations like Uwezo Uganda come in and join our efforts to provide quality education and learning, we take comfort in knowing that we are not walking the journey alone. We are grateful that they have taken the right direction in helping us document the gravity of such challenges, specifically those related to poor learning outcomes. Such efforts are key in enabling the ministry to undertake improvements at all levels now and in the future. The findings released today will therefore continuously inform how we plan for and develop, prioritize, and invest in education sector to better the quality of education, including improvement of learning outcomes, especially in the districts that have over time been left behind. Inasmuch as these findings are similar to those of previous years and highlight consistently low learning outcomes, late entry in school, and variations in performance due to economic influences, among others, the significance highlighted above about the value added to learning outcomes through provision of early childhood education is a constant reminder of the need for reforms within the education sector. We welcome the latest Uwezo findings, as this will enable us to reflect on the sector achievements as well as steer us to a new direction. As government, we will endeavor to take the findings of the report seriously and act on them. As I conclude, I call upon all stakeholders within and out of the ministry to join hands in the efforts to improve learning outcomes for Uganda's children. I encourage parents, teachers, community leaders, local government officers to join forces with government in addressing the challenges of low learning outcomes highlighted in this Uwezo report. It is my pleasant duty and honor to officially launch the 2021 Uwezo report titled Our Children Learning, Illuminating the COVID-19 Losses and Gains in Uganda. I thank you for God and my country.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the report is now ready for public consumption. Congratulations, Uwezo. Congratulations, the team. And to the virtual audience, you can now click on the link that will be provided to you so that you can access it. We want to thank you very much. May I invite, at this very juncture, I will invite Farida Nasereka, Senior Program Officer, to pass a vote of thanks, and thereafter we'll have a skit to climax the event. I want to thank you very much to our distinguished audience and the media.
Thank you very much. All protocols observed, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My role is very simple, it's just to pass on a vote of thanks. As we conclude today's event, where we have launched our Uwezo 9th Learning Assessment Report, we greatly relay our deep sense of appreciation to our guest of honor, represented by the Commissioner, the Honorable Minister of State for Education and Sports, for primary education. We thank you for the time you have taken this evening to join us yet for another memorable achievement as we launch our very first report as an independent entity. Your presence has assured us that we can always count on the support that has been offered over the years from the Ministry of Education in our humble efforts to improve learning outcomes for the children of Uganda. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to the Uwezo Uganda Board and our Technical Advisory Committee for always guiding us. It is with your support, commitment, and energy that we as an organization are able to bear achievements such as this launch. We are indeed greatly honored to have you on the team with us. To all that have played a role in this journey, we took to see today's launch happen, including our funders who were earlier mentioned, regional and global partners, including the Regional Education Learning Initiative and the PAL Network, partners at the district level with whom we undertook this assessment, the volunteers who tirelessly collected the data, the trainers and staff at Uwezo. We are indeed deeply indebted to you and greatly appreciate your efforts. Further, we are grateful to the moderator and the panel that has engaged us in rich and lively discussions that have given us deeper insights and reflections on the work that we do and for the future of the work that we shall always undertake to see that the learning of children in Uganda improves. We are most grateful to our audiences, both physical and virtual, and the presence of the media for the time and dedication to be with us this evening. We are inspired by your presence, and we know we are in the journey of improving learning for our children together. We thank you very much and wish all of you a wonderful evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we shall be toasting to the big stride that we've made getting this report out. But for now, we can only climax it with a beautiful song that was composed to accompany this event and the launch. And thereafter, ladies and gentlemen, we humbly invite you to join us at the cocktail so that we march away as we celebrate one of the key milestones for Uwezo. That's it. Let the music play.
No, man. No, woman. We all can. That's what God says in our way. We can move mountains. We can break roads. Black or white, red or green. Let us.
Members of the media, we're going to have our interview downstairs. And kindly, let's make it as brief as we can. Dr. Mary Gorage Nakabugo will be down for the Uganda sound bites. Thank you. Can the rest of us join in at the cocktail? Thank you. Hum, hum.